today we are here with my guest, Paul Kegel. and yeah, that maybe is not a easy name for you to pronounce in the way that I just did, but since I'm from the Netherlands and Paul is from the Netherlands, for me, it's a really easy name to pronounce. Paul Kegel, maybe in English. I'm not sure what they would say. It's cone. It's the cone is the translation, right? Yeah.
Yeah. That's
So
right.
welcome, Paul.
Happy to be here, Arno.
And you are have been certified coach since 2021.
Yeah.
But you are also working mostly in a job.
Yeah.
So I think it is interesting to learn a couple of things today in talking with you about habits, how you use habits and why habits are important to you. Let's talk about how you combine your normal work between quotes and coaching, and also how coaching is important in business. So let's start with the idea of habits, because I was checking on your profile and on your LinkedIn and so on, that it said you had 4,500 check-ins. That was last year, by the way.
Yeah.
That was a goal that you celebrated. How do you do it? How do you check in so many times? Because even I skip and don't follow some periods, and other periods I'm very active. But how do you get in so many check-ins?
It's for mostly building the habits and building the habits on the right approach. So I think, and also the Coachdotme principle of starting small, gaining momentum, and gradually graduating actually and increasing your habits is the perfect way to do that. So a couple of years ago, I started with a 1,000-day journey, which was one of the ideas I had to do a couple of things for 1,000 days, but also do 100 experiments of 10 days in 1,000 days. And I think I get most of the check-ins from the Coachdotme app on, because then I've done a couple of things every day for 1,000 days. And after that, some of them quit because habits you need to keep alive and keep up. But that's the thing about habits is if you make them stupidly easy to do every day, and you do them every day, over time it's so easy that checking in is becoming a habit too. And then you get to check in. And I'm also, because the Coachdotme journey started already in, I think, 2017 with Lyft, the former name of the app. I was a user of that. I figured it out on the internet, and I came across Tony, the founder, and I was like, hey, this is interesting idea. It was even before they had coaching. And after a little while of using it, I skipped over to my notes on my phone, which kind of can do the same like making a list. But I keep making the list, kind of the same list every morning to make sure I get everything done before I leave for work. And after a while, I was like, okay, this app is much better to do it and keep your streaks and keep the fire going. So I still use it every day to check off some of the habits. I have some habits in private, and some habits are shared for the entire world to also kind of make it open for everybody to see that a coach, even if I coach habits, it's still hard sometimes to build new habits. But
Right.
that's basically the way to have a lot of check-ins. Build discipline and make it so easy that it's almost impossible not to do.
What were some of the challenges you did in those 1,000 days?
I had a lot of challenge. I started with a cold shower challenge, which I ended up also figuring out with Wim Hof, which is also risen in popularity in between. I quit biting my nails, which I still have done. So I tried a couple of different things like wearing gloves or filing them every day. And in the end, I started doing every day one finger to file one finger, and every day make sure. And I also built in nail files, I think that's the right word, everywhere where I was like having the tendency to bite my nails. So in my computer, in my car, and eventually after like I think 200 days, I was like, I notice I'm not having the tendency anymore to do it. So even when it started with 2 or 3 experiments for to try to do something for 10 days, it ended up in being a habit I'm not doing anymore. So that basically that's the upside down of a habit, but it could also work very well in your life. And another thing was I started with one push-up and adding one push-up every day. And I got to 100. I believe I can't do that anymore right now. But at the time, I was much more into sports and physique. So those are some of the basic habit experiments I did, and start to build it.
Because 1,000 days, that's about 3 years.
Yeah.
What was the most interesting thing that you took away from those 3 years?
I think the first thing I learned from that is that if you set a bigger goal, bigger than a year, and you have really clear every day what to do, you can achieve it. So it sounds sometimes simple, but you get, most people set goals for the year, and halfway through the year, life happens, and we kind of reset on January 1st, and we, have our goals for the year again. We have the New Year's resolutions, and taking a broader scope, thinking about where do I want to be in the next 3 years, which is still pretty small compared to your entire life, gives me a little bit more perspective on, it doesn't have to be done in December. Now I have more time to do that, but I take really, really small steps. And I think I also learned some patience in that. I think those are the two most important takeaways. And of course, a lot changes in 3 years time. And it's interesting to, keep going over multiple years with the same goals.
Could you maybe, do you have like a goal which is like 10 years?
No, at the moment not.
Right.
So it's interesting because in my team, people I work with, I always ask them where you want to go, and we try, to create a little bit more horizon than 6 months. If you look at 3 years, it's already a lot in your life what can happen. And I think, of course, 10-year goals are great, but I think it's really hard to keep up with, to have that kind of abstraction in a goal that it's still, helping you in 10 years, because there's so many things that can happen in 10 years. The world is changing a lot. Your entire physical body changes in 7 years. So of course it's good to have like a dot on the horizon, but it's important for me, it's important that goals help you forward to where you want to go, instead of that you're just working towards the goal for the goal itself, because then you also can, lose the motivation to achieve that goal. But if I'm curious, if there are people who have like 10-year goals and are really working towards them in a bigger manner, I'm really interested in how they do that, because it's a really long haul, in my opinion.
And I can imagine that other entrepreneurs, for example, say that 3 years is already a long time and they have no clue where they will be in a year. So that they don't see that part of a 3-year goal is interesting for them either. So that's why I was trying to stretch the horizon a bit, because I think when you look at the really important big things that we need to accomplish as a humanity, is really change like the economic system, change the way that we treat garbage, resources, people. So that's all goals that's way beyond 3 years, and probably even beyond 10 years. So like the whole SDGs, that's for 2030, net zero is 2050. So that's all long term. And if we didn't make it long term, we wouldn't be able to do it at all, because you cannot change things like that overnight. So I'm thinking, how could we help people in like organizations and companies to think more longer term, even beyond the 1,000 days?
It's an interesting question. Of course, there are goals which are not achievable in even 3 years of time. But the interesting part, I think, is that when you have the bigger dot on the horizon, you can still look at what's the if you trace back from 10 years, what do I need to achieve the next year in order to take the right step towards the end goal? And because it's also like when you say, okay, in 2030 we have to achieve the XYZ. It could also give a sense of, oh, we have all the time of the world because we still have 10 years to go. And if you make a smaller part of that goal into like a goal for this year or even this month, or even better, if you can try to shape it into what's the behavior we have to do every day in order to get there, it's much easier to know if you're on track.
Why is it that, do you believe, are they habits so important to you? Because I also saw that you were on Duolingo at some point at the 400-day streak. I have been using Duolingo to learn French again because we're going to France, to Marseille in the summer.
Awesome.
And well, I something happened and I got ill, so then the streak stopped. And now I find it pretty difficult to get back into it right now because, first of all, you have a week that you were ill, that you have to, get back to the work that you've missed in that week and do the work that you were supposed to do in that week anyway. So hopefully after this weekend I can start again, but maybe in the weekend. So how do you think that you were able to do like a 400-day streak?
I think it's because there's the great thing about Duolingo is they have a streak freeze. I think that's that's an ass saver, right? If you look at, I think James Clear had that principle written in his book about atomic habits. That's never miss twice. So by allowing that it's okay to miss out one day, but not allowing to miss a second day, and really be disciplined about it, even when you're sick. I think it's possible to find a couple of minutes in your day to do that. And most often I work about 10, 12 habits at the same time. I don't advise it to other people, but that's the way how it works for me. But I have like some habits which are like unquestionable, something I do every day. There's no way I'm going to miss them. And even
For
if I miss
example,
them,
what is one of those?
one of those is brushing my teeth in the morning. And sometimes I miss one day, but I always make sure the next day I'm keeping up, because I think the streaks are a great way to keep the fire going, because it's a dopamine hit when you have like 10-day streak, 20-day streak, 100-day streak. But I also figured out that once you miss your streak, the negative effect of missing it, or that it's done, is double as the positive effect it usually have. So streaks can work for you, but also can work against you in terms of habits. And when you have like the decision for yourself, okay, I can miss one day, even if it kills the streak, but the next day I can start again and I keep up for myself, then you let it work for you. And you can also because when you skipped one day, most often we feel some kind of guilt towards, oh, I missed it. I messed up this streak. And once you turn it into a permission for yourself that it's okay to miss a day, because life happens, we don't have 100% control of the world, it's much easier to restart, because that's actually what needs to happen also for you next week. There is a moment where you make that decision that, okay, and right now I'm restarting, even though I have missed my streak or the big streak I've built on, I will restart and I will rebuild again. Because every day you're still skipping, you're building a habit of not doing it. And that's what James Clear in Atomic Habits is writing. Once you start missing twice, you're making a habit of missing.
Right.
Tiny, but I think that's a great thing. I always, also share with the people I coach, to make sure that if you're too strict about having to do it every day, you're putting force on it, which is not helpful, because you're doing it for yourself. You're not doing it for anybody else. I hope so, because if you're externally motivated, it's much more difficult to keep going in the end.
Yeah, great point. Great point. I'm thinking about the whole Duolingo for me, and also, for example, I was injured with my running, and I found it very hard to get back into the rhythm. And I still need strength exercises, and I still find it very difficult to start those. Missing the streaks, missing days is becoming a habit on that part. That sounds really logical. So, what do you think is important to do? Because you mentioned like these tiny habits, and you also wrote a post about this, about the lean startup, atomic habits, the 100-day challenge, the whole combination. What do you think, and what do you coach people? How do you start with building a great habit?
The first thing I always check out is why are they doing it. So I want to know their motives, even if they go all over the place. And some people say it's very private, but I always try to figure out, okay, what's the fire burning? Why are you actually doing this? Because that's, if there's not a good enough why, that you can put all the technique to work in terms of habits, but you're not going to keep going in the end. And next, I always figure out the most tiny step. So I coach a lot on studying, because next to ownership, that's one of the topics I'm intrigued about, and I'm also interested in myself. And for some people, and I think that the tiny start is different for everybody. So there's not like a perfect golden tiny habit for studying, for running, for language learning, or any habit. And I think it's important for everybody to figure out themselves, to experiment a little. So at the start, I always give some room for experimentation to figure out what's the right quantification of the habit, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, for some people, it's studying for an hour. For some people, it's 5 minutes. And for some people, it's even opening their book, because that's the way they actually start and get in motion. And I think the motion is the most important part of the habits, because once there's, even if like every day for 1 minute, over time it accumulates, but also you are already there. So you're in the right mindset to, grow it gradually. And that's the way I think almost start with coaching habits.
You started in your work mostly in marketing and sales, and often in technical or software kind of systems. So you got more used to the Scrum parts. So you had your own business, you start building websites, you again became part of other companies. Now you are the operational manager of QFact, a company that builds software to monitor the infrastructure business sector.
Yep.
How do you combine the coaching with your day job?
I think it's part of my day job, because I, as a manager, I also lead a team. But part of our performance model in our company is that we have coaching. So every person in my team, I have 3 weekly coaching sessions with, and we have a program of personal development, and we have like an earnings model combined with a performance model. So we have 2 yearly reviews on terms of where they want to, increase or improve their work into their work. And part of that is coaching. So I think that's a great opportunity I had. That's a pretty young team, a lot of young people working, and I have the opportunity to also coach them. So part of my work with the team is the individual coaching, and making sure that the individual coaching contributes to the whole of a team. And there's a lot of same things with habits, because habits also in your daily work, when you work with software engineers, when you work with designers, they also have like work habits that they use every day. And in the end, the behavior we have creates the results we make as a team. And if you are, and I think it's fortunate to work with a team every day, so you can really get to know them. And because I think that's the hardest part of Coachdotme, that you have like daily messages, but you have very little information to work with. So you have to do a lot of assumptions and figure out what's actually working for the person. And the difference with working with a team day in, day out, every day, you get to know them really well. So you also are much easier to observe what's happening and when they are having a tough time or where they see they're struggling. But you also can say, okay, try to figure this out. And in 3 weeks, we talk about it. And then they have their own exploration process. So for me, coaching is, I think it's not in my job description officially, but it's something you have in you and you're doing, and you want to, basically ask the right questions, because then they will figure out the right answers.
And do you include habits in these coaching sessions with your team?
Not as like explicitly as I do with Coachdotme, because then you're hired as a coach to work on a specific habit, of course. But it's, I think the smaller habits and the habits as a team is something I've worked on. One of the artifacts of Scrum is the daily stand up. And even through COVID, we have had that stand up every day, 8:30 sharp. And it, in the beginning, it was like, okay, everybody rolled out their bed and just opened their laptop. But over time, when we had to get back to the office, people were like 1 minute late, 3 minutes late. And that's something we also worked on, by really, giving the opportunity. And now some days everybody is 1 minute ahead of time, and we're like, okay, we can start, we're here. And I think that's basically a great habit of the entire team, to start their day checking in, knowing how everything is going, knowing who has, need some information from another colleague. But it's also really a thing to become a team, because you're there every day. So that's.
And the coaching through Coachdotme, how do you get clients? Because you have a web page of the business that you do, aim for ownership. But how do you get clients?
I think that's the magic of Coachdotme. I have a website, if you like to call it, but that's kind of like the leaking sink of the people who are working on. I think the plumber, I think, is the English word for it. And the interesting thing is, I know exactly how to build websites, and I'm proficient in building websites, but I never have the time to do that, because it's a decision on coaching people or building a website to coach more people. And because I work full time and coaching is my side business, I'm limited in terms of the amount of clients I can do. And somehow magically, once I finished my certification with Coachdotme, I have like 4 or 5 coaches every month in a continuous basis. Sometimes 3, sometimes 6, but over time. And I actually haven't done anything about that than just being on the platform and I figured out, and I think that's a great thing of the coaching certification, that you got to figure out your habit, but you also have to test it with some people to figure out the pattern of the habit. And once you have figured, for studying, for example, there's a certain way people are getting into studying. So there are some problems with studying which are for everybody the same. So one of the interesting things with studying is that I always touch the sleeping habits of people, because sleep has so much influence in studying. And once I think about your niche, because there are a couple more people on studying, but there are not a lot of people coaches on studying. Once you know your niche, I believe it's resonating with the people who are looking for a coach, and the Coachdotme marketing and the platform and the app, and that's enough for me to get a solid stream of coaches every month.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, it is. And how do you? Because you have a day job, which probably is including the drive to the company. It takes about 10 hours a day. So how do you do the work before? Do you do the coaching work after? How do you do this?
Most often I figure out, because we coach internationally, we have like the time zone thing, which is sometimes really hard, but sometimes it's amazing. Especially with New York. Somehow I have a lot of people in the New York area. They are 6 hours, and we are 6 hours ahead of time. So when I wake up and I send them a message, they always get it at the start of their day. And also at the end of the day, around 7 p.m. here, it's 1 p.m. there. That's sometimes a great meetup point. So I think it's most often before or after work, I write the messages. I wake up early. I have a very strict schedule for myself, so I wake up early. I go to bed on time, but it's a basic question of time management. Actually working, knowing when to work. But I'm also very open to it about clients. So when it's extremely busy at work, or when there are some incidents or something, they know I'm sometimes their message get a couple of hours later, or they get a short check-in how they're doing, and a longer check-in once I schedule the time for it. And that's also important to limit the amount of people you can coach. Because if I would like do a lot of marketing and go to 20, 30 people to coach, then it's getting really, really almost impossible. Because 5 people is like 5 times, sometimes 2, 3 to 5 minutes. And you can, if you wake up on time, you can make the time to write those messages. That's the way I do it.
What's the most important thing that you use to keep people checking in and doing their habit? Not missing a day. Or maybe not missing more than 2 days, I should say. Right?
Yeah, I think the great thing a coach can do is because I don't have to do the work. So in terms of people who are studying, they sometimes have to study for 3 hours every day, and I don't have to do the studying. But I can observe, and I always try them to check in, but also check in with the amount of time they study, to be really transparent, not judgmental, but to be really transparent. And the great thing I figured out is that as a coach, you can pretty easy, you can figure out a pattern. So most people have a pattern of going really strong, and Thursday, Friday, and then the weekend is always busy, and then on Monday they restart again, full energy. And sometimes it's enough to just point out that they have that kind of pattern. But sometimes I also work with clients, like saying, okay, let's do an extra check-in on Thursday night, or make sure that you keep your Thursday, Friday up to break that pattern. But I think that's the most essential thing you can do as a coach, besides just accountability. So they know you are there, they know they have to check in, they commit to it, so they want to be consistent and get to the check-in. I think the most important thing we can do as a coach is figure out the pattern and communicate that openly, like saying, hey, this is what I see, do you see it too? And then we get awareness of the pattern for the client, and that's helping them. But also be patient, because I think I've never had a client in the past 2.5 years that was able to build an instant streak of 30, 40 days out of nothing, because it's always up and down at the start. And I think to give them some little space of experimentation before they are really getting solid. And the ones that are getting solid, it's important to never go too fast. Because once they are, in the high up, they were like, oh, I can now do 3, 4, 5, 6 hours. And I'm like, no, don't go. And that's one of the quotes I always use is, and I wrote also a blog about that. Don't go too fast, but make it last. And that's I think one of the most important things we can communicate, because it's about the long term that the habit has the most effect.
Right. So I was just already brought your profile up before, and you can see that you have like 4 habits that you coach on that are open, and probably even more that are even hidden. Study, sleep at least 7 hours, read, and take ownership. And apparently, study is the most important one for you.
Study is because there's a triangle of habits that people are interesting, because most people enter with a habit they can really relate to, because studying and sleeping is something we can figure, okay, I'm struggling with studying, I'm struggling with sleeping, perhaps I need to do something about it. Reading is an interesting one. I had some really interesting funny clients with reading, which are like, especially see the importance of reading, but it's not a topic. I love to read. I read a lot. That's why I started with the habit, but it's not something people really have. It's not blocking them enough in their life to hire a coach for it.
Yeah.
And ownership is basically the thread below it that's interwoven into everything I do. But it's a really abstract habit for people to start with. So I started with taking ownership, but it's got a little slow, and it's really took a lot of time to explain it to people. So most often they come in with studying, and over time I tell them about it. Once studying is going solid, I tell them about the principles of ownership and how you apply them within your work, and then you keep going and building on that.
Oh, that's interesting. So tell me a bit more about the principle of ownership.
Yeah, so ownership actually started for me with the book of Stephen Covey, Seven Habits. I think most people know about it. And there was something that happening when I read about the circle of control and the circle of concern. So somehow there was like, okay, you have control over some things in life and other things not. Just knowing that already is interesting. And then I read about the responsibility, which he coined into the responsibility. So we have basically responsibility to respond in a certain way. And then he wrote about the gap between the stimulus and the response. So we can make a decision on how to respond. And that was actually the first thing, even though I didn't know it as ownership, that was the first introduction of ownership into my personal life. I'm like, hey, I'm able to make a decision, and I have way more control in situations when I make an active decision on that. And then I stumbled upon, actually with my current employer, who introduced me to Jocko Willink with his book Extreme Ownership, and that's where it took off. And I was like, okay, this is really interesting, and that's where I think the opposite of ownership is victimization, and how Jocko Willink says there's no one else to blame. It kind of connected with the responsibility of COVID. Like, okay, there's so much more that we can do if we look at from ourselves or our own perspective in terms of like the world is against me. And from that point forward, I know this because I had an interesting conversation with another coach that also, if you look at Stoicism, but if you also look at NLP or Tony Robbins, who based most of his theories on NLP, the theory of we have more in our control and focus on what we can control instead of all the other things. It basically gives you a lot more power in life because then you're actually, able to do something. And even though sometimes it's the only thing we can do is accept, it's for me a personal. I think it really changed my life in the way I look at the world when I got into ownership, because once you recognize when you're acting like the victim or like pointing to somebody else, you're aware of that, and then where you're switching back and always ask the question, what can I do about this? And that's right. where you get control back. So that's the really short summary of ownership and the principles of that. And when I started coaching, I was like, okay, how can we turn this into a habit? So I developed some steps and processes without knowing anything about ownership, on, okay, how can you learn that in terms of awareness, in terms of decisions, in terms of, the difficult parts of ownership in difficult situations of your life. So it's really, I've coached a couple of people on it. Most often I'm studying, but in the start, there was a couple of people I coached on it. And it was really fun to do, and also to see what it's doing, once you start with ownership, there's no way back. Mm-hmm. and that's somehow magic to see.
I feel that Stoicism is like the operating system of my life, and the most important, I wouldn't say rule, but idea of Stoicism for me is that you don't control anything except how you respond to the things that happen to you. And it's the same thing, right? Ownership, taking ownership. It's the way how you respond to the things that are happening to you externally, even internally. When you, for example, become ill, same thing, right? So how do you respond to that? That's for me the most important part. So I really like it, and I think that when people want to learn more about ownership and they want to really tackle it, I have now also on the screen a QR code which you can scan, and then you go directly to the profile page of you on Coachdotme, coachdotme./be more. That's your profile that we previously also had in the video, if you will look in the video. And if you, for example, want to watch this video later on again, or you've just missed a part of it, it will be up the next Monday on the blog.coach.me, including on YouTube, and it will be on Spotify as a podcast. So that's going to be great. And if you want to listen to more of these kind of conversations with coaches or experts in habits like Paul, who is an expert and a coach on this topic, tune in every Friday. We are here at 9 a.m. Central or 4 p.m. and Central European time. So thank you, Paul, for sharing your lessons and learnings, for example, about the 1,000-day challenge, which sounds really interesting and horrifying at the same time. Doing like 100 challenges, I can see how that will be very interesting to do, but also, my gosh, a lot of work. And how you are so strict on doing the challenges with, not the challenge, but the habits, by being able to complete so many habits, and also on Duolingo, these really huge amounts of check-ins, and how you found your niche on Coachdotme with the study part by iterating and finding out, so where do people really reply, what do they respond to. And it was wonderful to learn how you combine your day job and Coachdotme. So thank you for that, Paul.
Thank you for being here. It was amazing to talk about this, and yeah, I'm happy also watching this show every Friday to learn from other coaches, because I think that's the principle of being a study coach, that you have to love learning. So I would say to everybody, always keep learning, never stop learning.
I agree. Thank you, and have a great day.
Bye, Arno.